deaths have been reported.
Powerful Category 5 storm is the strongest ever to hit the South Pacific nation.
Data published by US and UK meteorologists say the sharp increase in 2015 can be attributed to human activities, notably
Scientists are screaming from the rooftops about us avoiding going over a 2-degree rise in the temperature of the planet. Why are they so worried about that? If we go over that amount of warming, there are feedback loops in our ecosystems, tipping points that climate change could spin out of control, and it happens like that.
There are switches that can be tripped where suddenly you are in brand new territory and you don't even begin to know what to do about it. This is not a linear kind of problem that we're dealing with. This is very much an exponential kind of problem.
Right now, we're on the edge of 3 major tipping points. The first one is the Arctic ice cap. That ice cap's like a mirror. It reflects the sun's light off of the Earth and keeps it from warming us up. But as it melts, you get a smaller mirror, which means a warmer Earth, which means more melting, which means more climate change. Another example is Arctic methane. We've got a gigantic amount of methane gas frozen into the tundra, and it is 50 times as toxic as CO2 is. It's CO2 on steroids. As it warms, and that methane gets released, it then causes global warming to get worse, which means it warms more, which means more methane released, which means worse warming, and all of that process spins out of control. Another example of a tipping point is ocean acidification. As you get more CO2 in the atmosphere, a lot of it actually is going into our oceans. And a lot of stuff, like plankton, can't live in that kind of acidified water. And plankton is the basis of the food chain. If the plankton die, we lose the whole ocean ecosystem.
These kinds of feedback loops and tipping points are what keep me up at night, that we will hit one before we're able to turn things around.
Even if we went cold turkey today because of the time lags in our climate system, we've already signed up for things that we can't see yet.
We live in a razor-thin livable universe. Just a few kilometers below my feet, it's too hot to live. Just a few kilometers above my head, the air is too thin to breathe. It's not about a few more droughts and a few more storms. It's about a catastrophic shift in this fragile balance of our biosphere that threatens everything we love.
What we all need to be focused on is turnout, turnout, turnout.
Youth, is there somebody that wants to do an update from youth, Armando?
So just a quick list of things I wanted to go over. Obviously, a lot of the folks who are working on the youth stuff are at the Climate Justice Youth Leadership Summit. There's a lot of organizing going on right now there for the People's Climate March, so a lot of people who may not have been plugged in already are getting informed about it, and the people who already are informed about it are getting even more people fired up about it.
There's a lot of things that we pay attention to, that we focus on, that are fun, but they are short-lived and they are not for the betterment of us. We have to reprioritize what's important to us. Our environment isn't just ice caps melting in Antarctica. We're the ones who face the problems day to day. If you're breathing in smog or your little brother has asthma, that's environmental injustice. And those are things that we have the power to push back on. Imagine being the person who changes the face of climate change so that we don't have to deal with those impacts every day.
So on September 21st, we're gonna march for climate justice. So who's with us? Come on,
Okay, all right. Yes, we pull the fossil fuels out of the ground, we put them in the incinerator, they put the carbon in the sky, it warms the earth, lots of bad stuff's gonna happen, heat waves, extreme weather, floods. Okay, sure. But I mean, really, is that the thing I care about most? You know, there's all these other issues in my life that are more pressing. For someone who is engaged in a struggle for a higher minimum wage or worries about healthcare, it's understandable that these molecules floating around the air seem invisible and abstract.
Humans have this thing that we call a finite pool of worry. You've got your mortgage you've got to pay, you've got your kids you've got to take care of, and they tend to be more immediate. We respond to things that feel incredibly urgent, like a gun to the head, a stampede of wild elephants, right? Climate change is a completely different kind of risk. It plays out over these very long time scales. It's really hard to perceive it as a very urgent threat. The other thing that happens is that there's something called a single action bias. We have this tendency to see a threat and then we try to fix it with one thing. It's like the silver bullet solution. When we look at climate change, we become overwhelmed by it because there's so many different ways that we're going to need to fix it.
25 years we've been talking about climate change. The level of scientific reports becomes higher and higher and higher. Why has that still not compelled the majority of people to action? Cognitive psychologists have been mapping the processing systems within our brains, and they found that there are two parallel and deeply interlocked processing systems. The rational side, the analytic side, which deals with information, facts, data. And we have another side, which is a much more intuitive and emotionally driven side. It is that emotional system that moves us into action. The challenge for climate change is how do we get something that is so based in the science to cross over into the side which makes us feel something. People are reluctant to stand up and to take action if they don't see that the other people around them are taking action. And that is why it is absolutely critical that there are people who are seen to be doing something. They are creating the breakage. Climate change is strangely, maybe uniquely problematic because not only are we all bystanders, we're also perpetrators, actively contributing to the thing. If we recognize the problem, we become morally compelled to take action on it. There is a fundamental tipping point at which that has to happen.
Change doesn't happen because people decide to stay home and click like on Facebook. Change happens because people like you and I decide to get involved.
We didn't want to leave it to world leaders. Their track record is not very good in dealing with this question.
I am a trade unionist, and I am an environmentalist, and I see no conflict whatsoever in those two things. It's in our core self-interest as a trade union movement to help build the path to a sustainable future and get on the right side of the climate change issue sooner rather than later.
Normally it takes a long time to switch energy sources, 50, 60 years to go from wood to coal, coal to oil and gas. We lack 50, 60 years.
The reason we want to get off of fossil fuels now is because we have to protect our way of life.
We need a vision for what the post-carbon economy looks like that is inspiring enough and delivers enough in terms of jobs, in terms of new opportunities, in terms of better health. It has to be exciting.
There are many more jobs available to people who are going to be building wind turbines, retrofitting houses so they waste less energy.
Solar panels have to be installed by a person. That person has to go to your home. There's no way to outsource putting that solar panel onto a roof.
A 100% renewable economy is within our grasp. It's economically and technologically possible. It's not something that we need to keep researching because it's always off in the distance. No, it's here. It's a question of political will. If you look at the renewable revolution that's happened in Germany, it wasn't about leaving the renewable sector to the market. It was about creating different incentives. And there was an explosion of innovation and creativity.
Germany is now the #1 solar country in the world, even though they have the same amount of solar incidents as Alaska.
Can we do it? Can we take the power that has been highly centralized, highly focused, and controlled by very few hands, and it is not an accident that very few hands controlling power in the sense of electricity leads to very few hands controlling power in the sense of political power. We are going to try a global experiment that is going to be the most difficult thing human beings have ever done, which is to rip those two apart, which means we are democratizing power in both senses of the word.
The real question is, are we gonna scrape the bottom of the barrel for the last polycarbons on Earth to burn them too? Or can we actually show some restraint, which we ask our children to do? Don't eat the last 17 marshmallows. Can you just show some restraint and choose a wiser course?
A Canadian company called TransCanada wants to build the Keystone XL pipeline. The $13 billion system would carry crude oil from the so-called tar sands region in Alberta to Houston, Texas for refining.
The Keystone XL pipeline has become a huge focus of controversy. The tar sands oil is particularly dirty, it's particularly carbon intensive.
An estimated 2,000 environmental activists from across the continent plan to gather in Washington, D.C. to launch a 2-week protest.
It has become a symbol to both sides in this debate, where the people who want further development of fossil fuels see getting Keystone through as core to their strategy, and on the other side, the climate activists see it as a symbolic fight that they have to win.
I'm here as a Nebraska citizen and landowner.
I am on the advisory board of the Center for Health and the Global Environment at Harvard
I'm an
Medical
evangelical
School.
Christian. I'm a proud member of the Transport Workers Union of America.
You know what's so fascinating about this whole Keystone thing is that was supposed to be a wedge, and instead it's been turned upside down. Now it's actually a base that is lining up constituency after constituency.
Today we act! Today we send a message to them and everybody else. We are taking back our futures!
Something extraordinary and unexpected has backfired out of the ambition of the fossil fuel companies. They've built a movement by mistake.
If you are going to be risking arrest, you're going to be lining up over here.
One of the tools that came into play was peaceful civil disobedience to show the moral urgency of these problems, that this was the crisis of our time. I saw a story in one of the trade publications, the oil industry, not long ago, and they said, we're never going to get to build another pipeline in peace again. And I hope they're right.
As scientists, we study this out of this fascination and kind of awe of this whole system that we call home. We are on this planet that is so perfectly built to sustain life. We got so lucky. And then you begin to think, what do you do with this knowledge, this unbearable, incredibly depressing knowledge? That the decision to burn fossil fuels was a decision that had tremendous downside risks that we didn't realize immediately.
When I read a climate science article that talks about mid-century projections, what I read is what's going to happen when my kid is 40. That's what I see on the page. And for me, it is absolutely my responsibility then to do whatever it takes to protect my child.
Alice Walker says that resistance is the secret of joy. And I don't know if it's the secret of joy, but I know it is definitely the secret of staving off depression. The reality we're facing is very grave. So how do you not get depressed about it? Well, one way you don't get depressed is by work.
Things change for lots of different reasons. There's all kinds of dynamics, but one central element is people being in the streets.
All of us must stand up together and say, no more.
We live in a culture that doesn't tell us our own history, doesn't tell us the history of social movement wins. And the times in our past when masses of people have taken the wheel of history and turned it.
It was only 1% of Americans that ever took part in a civil rights demonstration, but they were able to change our society enough to stand up to those powers that be.
I think this march will go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, demonstrations for freedom and human dignity ever held in the United States.
Martin Luther King always said that the victories that had been won so far were the ones that were cheapest to the status quo. Giving legal rights and giving voting rights doesn't cost the system nearly as much as providing good jobs and good infrastructure and good schools.
We as a people will get to the promised land.
Big victories have been won before, but nothing on the scale of the economic challenge that really responding to the climate crisis represents. We have a responsibility to rise to our historical moment.
We are going around the world to say the time has come.
If we're going to have a movement worthy of the name, solidarity among all these different causes needs to be the foremost principle.
It's this broad and powerful spectrum of allies that has the political weight to move the dial on this. There's a tipping point coming where the online movements are going to move offline.
If we can just push this to a point where there is a social tipping point, we really can move forward on this issue.
We will not be stopped.
Take action right now. This is the issue I will vote on. This is the issue I will give money on. This is the issue that I will scream at the top of my lungs into a bullhorn over. That is what moves politics.
The People's Climate March is our chance to show the immense power of people in solidarity.
Heads of state are gathering. They need us to say, we demand action. This is the right thing at the right time in the right place. The whole world will be watching.
Nothing moves public opinion more than seeing large numbers of people gathering.
A march is not an end in itself. It is a tool. In my heart of hearts, I know that this People's Climate March in September will serve to deepen this movement.
I will be there in New York, September 21st.
There is no replacement, even in the digital age, for human bodies next to each other, standing as one, hearts beating as one, voices raised as one, making a political demand.
If you don't fight for what you want, you deserve what you get.
September 21st, in some ways, is the beginning.
There are teams around the world organizing marches in Rio, in Delhi, in Berlin, in Paris, in London.
And people around the world will get together in the largest climate change mobilization in history.
Are you ready to march? Are you ready to march? Are you ready to march?
We are wondering what is happening to the world. Everything is changing.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
Our bodies will be so high-tech we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
Inside our own heads is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe.
You might ask yourself, can we get to be superhumans?
The original Industrial Revolution was driven by the discovery that you could use steam engines to do all kinds of interesting things.
But that was followed by additional revolutions for electricity and computers and communications technology. We're now in the early stages of the fourth Industrial Revolution, which is bringing together digital, physical, and biological systems.
One of the features of this fourth Industrial Revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
with the ability to visualize brain activity, for example, through a simple consumer-based EEG device, it gives us access to ourselves in ways that we've never before thought possible. It unlocks the black box that is the brain and enables us to really, truly be able to realize an identity that is aspirational.
There's now a scientific foundation for the effects of mindfulness on the brain, on the genome, on biological aging. And when the human mind does know itself, then you get the potential for a new renaissance that restructures itself in terms of our relationship to life, our relationship to the planet, our relationship to work.
We need a different economic model. And by that I don't mean capitalism versus communism. What I'm talking about is a shift in the system along the lines of the two big changes that happened in the 20th century, Keynesianism, with a much greater focus on health and education and the role of government working with business, and then a reaction against that in late century to neoliberalism, where the focus was on free markets, freedom of the individual, and getting governments out of the way. We need a shift to a new system that will allow us to meet the basic needs of every human on the planet, that will live within planetary means, that will be fairer, and that will be focused as its key goal, not on growth per se, but on maximizing human well-being. And history tells us that a values shift is triggered by creation of a new story about how we want to live.
I see the circular economy as something which fits very closely with mankind's goal to be innovative and creative and to always progress. We can use asset tracking, we can use IT, we can use 3D printing to enable this different economic model to recover materials, feed them back into the economy, and really to decouple growth from the resource constraints we have.
The reason we live in cities is not different today than it was 10,000 years ago. Even if we have got networks connecting us, we still want to have places where we meet in person. So this means the place where we work and the place where we live are much closer to each other, a city where we don't need to have big supply chains in order to produce things, where many things can be sourced locally thanks to 3D printing and robotics. So if we're able to do something to transform cities, to make them more efficient, then the impact can be huge.
Think about the prospect of getting rid of plastics. We must not only be inspired or informed by nature, but actually use natural organisms with which to design products and building parts. Only instead of varying material properties, we're varying biological functionality.
Design is critical today because it's the first signal of human intention. So the question of adding quality to quantity, it isn't a matter of simply circulating things that are potentially toxic. It's circulating things that are safe and healthy for all generations. So the goal is no longer, I want to be less bad, less monotonous, less unsafe, less unjust. It's really about a diverse, safe, healthy, and just world with clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean energy.
Together we are fighting to preserve our fragile climate from irreversible damage and devastation of unthinkable proportions.
If we think about the original Industrial Revolution, it was an energy revolution. I like to think of it as a kind of bookending of a period in human history during which we used fossil fuels, and it worked very well for us for a long time. But now we have to bring that to an end. We have energy technologies that can power our civilization: solar, wind, biomass. So then the question is, well, how do we get grid integration? Maybe the wind is blowing in Denmark, the sun is shining in Germany, and now you can move that electricity through an integrated grid. You can supply energy to everyone who needs it, and you can supply energy at all times.
Walking around, you do see different stuff as far as like the body marriage line. They use a lot of things that help them lift up and move things to the car. You just sit there and, program something, and it has its own set mind to go ahead and do everything. And then as humans, we just come in and take the extra steps to help the technology.
It's not the cure-all for everything. There's definitely a lot of things where people perform the operation better, but certainly for the right applications, robotics are a huge improvement for the process.
The projection of 5 million jobs lost by 2020 to technology is serious, but it's not the main question. Construction, manufacturing, services, public health and education, these industries will still exist. The main question is, What will be the future of work? How will we define work? How will we share the wealth?
From the viewpoint of the labor or jobs, now we really need new education or new training.
We're working with a World in Motion in FIRST Robotics, trying to encourage students from 3rd grade all the way up through the end of high school. We had students make sailboats, and then we had them race them, and so they could see how quickly they could move. And they immediately went back and started to say, oh, I saw what happened, I'm going to go change this or that. And that was 3rd graders.
I just given a prize to a kid of 18 years old that has discovered something really very, very unique. Came up with how to get better productivity and better yields for seeds of corn. And so he basically came with the idea that if you would perforate these seeds, you would get more food. And you think about it and say, but he didn't go to university. So how does he get all that knowledge? And he told me, I've been watching YouTube since the age of 12, and I'm so interested that I've seen everything about it. I've read everything about it. The world is really open to learning. The thing is, how do you give the incentive to your kids to do that?
It's this ability of digital technology to change outcomes, to truly empower people all over the world that can create a more equitable growth, because I think the world needs that.
Fourth industrial revolution has the potential to make inequalities visible and to make them less acceptable in the future, and hopefully to gather and garner political support to take the necessary decision to reduce the gap.
Humans have always been using tools, but because of the recent advances in technology, we're beginning to have machines that can augment us in all sorts of interesting ways.
I was the first person in the world to be able to voluntarily move my legs while stepping in a robot by exciting the nervous system using electrical stimulators directly onto the spine. We believe that a cure will be possible if enough of the right people have the will to fast-track a cure for paralysis.
We take two things from the patient. First, we take a three-dimensional X-ray and we extract the three-dimensional data out of that so we can make a perfectly shaped puzzle piece. And then we also take a sample of fat tissue from the patient so that we can extract the stem cells out of those. And we use those stem cells with this three-dimensional scaffold that we fabricate, and after 3 weeks we have a piece of living bone that's ready for implantation.
Being able to use genome editing to understand the genetic changes that lead to cancer, and technologies like drug delivery, getting molecules into particular types of cells. There's a lot of excitement about being able to move much more quickly on this disease.
One of the things that I think is so essential to free and open societies is freedom of thought. And up until now, the conversation we've been having is around freedom of speech. Once we can access people's thoughts and access people's emotion, we have to create a space that enables people to think freely, to think divergent thoughts, to think creative thoughts. And in a society where people fear having those thoughts, the likelihood of being able to enjoy progress is significantly diminished.
We need to take responsibility at every level of society, from the individual and the personal to the institutional to the global, to adapt to these technological challenges and changes which are redefining what it means to be human, what it means to work, what it means to be completely embedded in this world.
People always ask me if I'm an optimist or a pessimist. The technology exists, but how do we get it and implement it at the scale we need at a price that people around the world can afford?
Even though we have everyday problems we have to solve, we have to find a way to lay the foundations for the innovations of tomorrow.
How do we understand our place in the universe? How do we try to answer the big questions in life? Who are we? What are we made of? Where do we come from? With the advent of digital age of computing, we were suddenly able to answer questions never before solved. Exploring the relationship between the imagination of the scientists and the frontier of computing and the ever closer reality of the universal quantum computer, this film examines the hazy boundary between imagination and reality.
So what I want to build is a large-scale quantum computer, a device which can solve certain problems so much faster, tremendously much faster. So what means much faster here? Much faster means that even the fastest classical computer may take 1 million years for a problem a quantum computer can solve in a few milliseconds. So that means we can solve problems which we never even thought of that would be solvable. You know, we may find new drugs, we may understand processes in biology, we may understand life itself. I grew up in Germany in a place called Ulm, close to Munich and Stuttgart. My mom would always say I'm asking a hole in her stomach because I kept on asking questions about everything. My father would take me to the planetarium and we would watch the shows, and I would go out in the evening with my telescope and try to learn about the planets and about nebulas and space in general. I watched Star Trek in primary school and then I wanted to be science officer on the Enterprise. And then I did some research and tried to figure out what do I need to study to become science officer on the Enterprise. I realized that actually being on a spaceship is not so great, but understanding nature is actually pretty awesome. So and understanding how things work, the mysteries of quantum physics, in fact the mysteries of subatomic particles, of how the world works. What I really wanted to do is